What's up, bookworms? This is Megan coming at you with another Cantina conversation. Today's episode features a chat with Diego Baez. We're talking about his collection of poems called Yaguareté White. If I pronounce that correctly, I do my best. I really enjoyed talking about Diego and just really digging deep into his personal experiences, and because the poems that he features is basically about his experiences as a half Paraguayan, half American, just basically growing up in the Midwest with occasional visits to his father's homeland. And so I just always appreciate getting to know authors and writers of different backgrounds and hearing what their experience is like and how they just expressed those that are into their artwork. But I'll let you guys get to it. Here is Diego Baez. Okay, so today we've got Diego Baez here. We're talking about his collection of short stories that is Yaguareté White. I hope I didn't butcher it too much. We'll see how this conversation goes. That collection is available now. Diego, thanks so much for chatting today. It's been a long time since I've read this collection, but I just remember it was like, a pleasant surprise. I enjoy reading from perspectives different than mine, and poetry, it's you never know what you're gonna get half the time. So I was just really excited. I'm glad to dig a little bit deeper today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is awesome. It's my pleasure. It seems like the book came out in February, and it seems like it was only February, but also has it been a lifetime? It's cool to come back now after a little time and kind of revisit and have a chat. So
Yeah, I bet. Like, 'cause, like, it's all I figure, like, all your press is, like, really condensed around that time, and then it's like, yeah, what, like, 6 months almost
yeah,
later?
yeah. And so I've had a lot of time
Yeah, that's
to
wild.
reflect on the book and like what's in there and the themes and all that, but also just the experience of putting the book out. Because yeah, it's like very exciting at first, and it's not boring or nothing now, but it certainly has dropped off where it's like, oh man, maybe there's still so much more to say or more conversation to have. So I'm very grateful. This is awesome.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, to get started, can you share, like, a summary of the collection or what the book is so that people can kinda follow along with the conversation?
Yeah, definitely. Yaguareté White is my first collection of poems. It took probably 10, 12 years to come together. And it all started when I started writing poems separately about language and play and silly things like etymology, like coincidences in words and things like that, but also wanting to write about my heritage. So my father's from Paraguay and my mom's from Pennsylvania. And they met here in the US, and just very different backgrounds and histories and heritages. And one of my advisors in grad school, Rigoberto Gonzalez, was like, "You're writing these separate poems, but that's not your life. That's not your story. It's both of them together. And so you need to combine these like stories of Paraguay together with explorations of whiteness and race and ethnicity, together with some of the playful language and explorations into like histories of words and word origins and things like that." And it's come together. And like we were just saying, it seems like it's been such a long time for these poems baking in my mind and drafts in my email or whatever to finally be on the page and be in a collection. And in some ways, it was actually about a year ago, a little over a year ago, where I was first seeing the proofs and first seeing like the PDFs from the press. And that feels like a lifetime ago, but it also feels like it almost didn't happen yet. Like I'm still stuck in this weird limbo of, oh yeah, the book's out now.
Yeah.
These ideas and poems are in the world. But it's been really super rewarding to just connect with anybody and everybody who's been interested. And yeah, it's uncanny. It's the whole experience so far.
Mhm. Yeah, 'cause I know I was, like, reading up about your experience a little bit. So you're a professor, right?
Yeah.
So you've been writing this poetry. Yeah, you said over 10 to 12 years. I'm guessing that's just when you were writing, and then all of us, like, the idea somehow came where you were like, maybe, "Oh, let's put this all
hmm
together." 'Cause your poetry has been featured in other works, just, like, not all together,
Yeah,
correct?
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so was there, if anything, like, if you wanna go into your background a little
hmm
bit, like, more extensively, your professional background, and maybe how any of that maybe prepared you for this big of a project? Any big lessons learned, things like that?
Yeah, I will say so. I came out of grad school. I did my master's of fine arts in Newark. And my last semesters of grad school, I'm very grateful for the freedom that I had. I was able to take workshops in poetry and fiction and nonfiction, which is a little unusual, but I'm so grateful for that because it opened my eyes and my ears too to just different styles of writing, different authors, different ways of handling language. And I will say I came out of that with sort of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, I didn't feel a lot of pressure to put a book together right away. And I think that was largely a good thing because I had other concerns. Like I had to find a place to live and like I started
Yeah.
teaching at city colleges so I could pay rent and buy food. But then at the same time, as the years ticked by and I found my home here in Chicago as a professor and then finally started teaching full time, I watched as my peers put out book after book and kind of move forward in their artistic careers, and it did start to like gnaw at me a little bit. And I think it was a combination of seeing other folks who I came up with and also respect and admire put their work out into the world together with, I guess that's a kind of freedom. I guess it is a kind of freedom. At least once I had a full time job, I didn't have to struggle and hustle so much to put the gigs together or piece together a bunch of reviews so I had a little extra pocket cash. I could relax a little bit in that regard. And that gave me the freedom to really focus on, okay, what have I got? What is it? Where is it going? And what could it become? I had come to a point where like I certainly didn't do this by myself. I had to really rely on friends and other poets and editors and mentors and even past professors and dig up those old emails to show them what I have and get some direction, some guidance to see what's shaping up here and what can I actually do with it? What do I need to do with it? And that took me into the early years of the pandemic, those first couple of years where then finally I had like a final version of the manuscript together that I was ready to send off to presses and whatnot. So it was a long time coming. Definitely felt ready to get them in the world, but also, like I said, a double-edged sword of like, I'm glad I waited because a lot of the stuff in the book I couldn't have written about right out of grad school, and also the kinds of
Mm.
writing I was doing. I don't. It would be a very different first book if it had come out back in 2010 or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I could totally appreciate that. Just especially, I think yeah, it's so valuable. Obviously, what a big difference it was to see other people, like your peers and your colleagues, doing something similar, because it's something that you had been thinking about. It wasn't completely out of your maybe your trajectory that maybe you had anticipated. But I think that's awesome that you just saw some other people doing it and you were like, "Oh, well, maybe there's not that much to it. It's just it takes the time that it
Yeah.
takes, and it takes all the cooks in the kitchen, so to
Mhm.
speak, that it takes." And that could be pretty tricky too, because I'm imagine working in the world of academia, it's some kind of collaborative,
Mm.
but there's more, I don't know, the chain of command, I'm assuming, into what you can teach in your classroom versus stuff that's collaborative, like putting a collection together and it's your baby or it's like your little babies all coming into one and you got to take that constructive criticism and that feedback versus I don't know maybe where you're instructing or when you're in academia you're maybe even with your students you're used to
Mhm.
doing that.
Mhm.
So was there any kind of transfer over there?
Mhm.
Was there any reflection on your part where you were like, I don't know, maybe I'll be nicer to my students now or
Ha, yeah.
anything like
I'll tell
that?
you, that's fascinating. I don't. Now you're making me wonder. Like, I should go back and think about or look at the poems I was writing during workshop in grad school because I started teaching. My first teaching experiences were during grad school, but not as part of my program. I had to get a job. Again, had to get a job to pay for
Mm,
food and stuff. And I was fortunate enough to teach like remedial, like dev ed reading and writing at the local community college at Essex County College. And even back then the rates that adjuncts were paid were even lower. I will say from like my first day, I didn't know what I was doing. I learned a lot.
yeah,
I remember even that first semester that I stumbled through feeling like while I was in class with students, like it was not the worst way to spend some time to make some money. Like it felt really worthwhile. And yeah, absolutely. The way that I taught and what I taught, and how, even back then, how I started thinking about like the texts that students are encountering and the extent to
yeah.
which they reflect the students' lived experience and not, really were those first
Mm,
seeds for the kinds of work that I'm doing now in the classroom for sure. And that I hope, that's a fascinating question. I can't believe I haven't like thought more about this, but like how that then shows up in the poems as well. Um,
mm.
until the book came out, I had lived those two lives separately. So teaching and learning and all that, and then my writing and reviewing. And it's been so wonderful to bring them together. I've done a few events at the college where I teach and with some of my some of my colleagues who I wouldn't have known that we had so many poets at Truman College, but we've got, and not just
Oh,
in the
wow.
faculty, we've got a couple staff, a couple administrators too, who are like actively translating and writing and publishing. And it's been really awesome to have those kind of come together more recently.
Yeah, that is fun. I That's so funny. So your students, when you were writing this or when you were in the process of putting this collection together, your students were aware, okay, I'm going to be a big deal. I'm publishing this book.
Yeah. No, and it's been funny, like, the students that we see at the city colleges, they're very plugged into some cultural kind of trends and others just completely, and that's probably true a lot of
Okay,
places,
sure.
but yeah, I would, I didn't say much of anything at all. I didn't want to make it about me in that way. But when the book did come out, I
Yeah.
had some travel and I had some events, and I casually in an offhand way would mention why. I'm not going to need to lie to them. And they were pretty enthusiastic about it and like excited and supportive,
Yeah.
and that was really cute. That was very kind of them to take an interest in that way because they didn't need to. They don't need to know that to
Yeah.
pass the class. But it's been yeah, really.
I could see that where you're like not necessarily you want to be humble about it and also maybe you weren't sure how it was going to be
Yeah,
received yet and you didn't want to like hype up this piece if it's not gonna
yeah.
hit right for lack of better words or if the vibe is off or
Mhm.
whatever. So I think yeah, I just like curious. I think that's so funny where I would probably be the same way where I'd be like, "Oh yeah, by the way, this like thing that I've been working like my heart and soul for 10 years, it's finally coming out and the release date's coming and so I won't be
Yeah.
around. I have to go do this thing that's because I'm releasing a book." I c Just, like, casually, and then have them be like, "Wait, what? Why didn't you
Yeah.
say anything? Are you kidding me?
You're
What?"
gonna be an author? Yeah, I guess so. It's weird when you say it that way,
No, a
but
poet. Okay, come on, get it right here. Like, have I taught you nothing? No, that's so cool. That's so funny. So besides that, because I wanna get into your
Mm,
background a little bit, because it is about your personal experiences, I guess, how they inspired this collection and, like, how you said where half of your background is not in
mhm,
America, in Paraguay, and then the other is very American, right? You said your mom's Pennsylvania, very American, in my opinion, anyway. So how? Because I guess like I feel like there are so many people who can relate to that on the
mhm,
fenceness, for lack of better words, of like kind of your tutoring. You don't quite fit 100% on either
mhm,
side. You're becoming like your own version of that, joining the biracial and and it's also tricky because it's like I said, I'm half Mexican, but I'm like my maiden name is McCarthy. I look like I hopped off the boat. Like I'm not. It'd be different if my last name was from my mother's side and
mm,
I looked like this, or if I looked like more darker
mhm,
skin, darker hair, and I didn't speak Spanish. I was like, because there's a whole class of people who are like that. Like my mom, for example, my grandmother wanted them to be as American as possible. No, we speak English, blah blah blah. So didn't grow up a native speaking fluently
mm,
either. I could totally like a lot of that stuff that resonates with me where it's like you're half
mm,
in and not just like Hispanic, it's like people who are like
mhm,
half
mhm.
Asian or half, I don't know, like half Russian or half Southeast Asian, whatever. These other parts of the world where it's still two cultures coming together and the person, or the result of those cultures, like it is tricky kind of finding
Yeah,
your place. If that's where like what you need for like your identity, it can be really tricky if that's what you feel like you need. So I want to like dig into that a little bit and explore that a little bit because like how you said using different
mm,
languages and you used the indigenous
yeah, yeah,
language, right? Some words there, which I thought was like I didn't even think of that. I'm like, okay, why wouldn't there be indigenous
mhm,
people like
mhm,
everywhere?
mm,
And so it's just so that's like a revealing too, and it makes it I bet just like another layer to your I don't know self discovery, trying to figure it
yeah.
out, things like that. I want to explore that and how you manage to just navigate that while putting this
Yeah,
collection
for
together.
sure. I think about that a lot, and I've had a chance recently to talk with some folks about it. Just this idea that anybody who has a hyphenated identity, like you were saying, regardless of where in the globe we're coming from, we inherit kind of half of our baggage and background from one parent, half from another. But at least for me, the way I exist in the world isn't like half of the time through Spanish and a Paraguayan lens, or half of the time through a white or Eurocentric lens. It's all of that all the time. And on the one hand, I think that can be empowering. Where was I? Oh, I was at an event at a college here in Chicagoland, and a couple of the Q&A portion that circled back around to this, where we were talking about, okay, I'm not like half Paraguayan American and half Pennsylvanian or something like that. I'm
Yeah.
Latino. I identify as Latino, and I'm also white. And for someone like me, that is clarifying as much as it is a little muddling, though, because I also have to like, it was important for me as a person and also in the book to not downplay that part of my heritage because it has informed how I move through the world, as much as I have also been like called to my face with malicious intent, like names other than Diego. Juan is a
Sure,
beautiful
yeah.
name, it's very powerful, it's not my name. If you call me that knowing that's not my name, there's some sort of motivation there. Not And so though, then in trying to unpack some of this in the book is like being honest about the fact that whiteness operates on a lot of different levels. On one, it's interpersonal, and like you were saying, like in the winters, yeah, I get pretty pale up here in Chicago, and I look pasty white, right? I look, well, I guess, whiter than during the summertime when I get nice and tan, and just that people might think differently based on what time of year they see me. But the reality is too, though, that the whiteness is also operating on these bigger levels, even like the levels of language, and the extent to which I try to work that into the book or even ask those questions. It gets tricky too, because I didn't want to turn it into a like a treatise or a manifesto, that's for sure. But I think what that meant was I had to find moments where those two things came together. So for example, there's a poem in there about basic whiteness, and it's toward the end of the book, and it leads up to this. Maybe it's ironic, it's like one of the darker sections of the book, but leading up to this concept, so introducing this idea of basic whiteness and how it's both this kind of superficial silly thing, pumpkin spice lattes and I don't know, whatever else, brunch, but it's also insidious because it can also work its way into big questions of power and culture. And I try to touch on it. I think I get a little pedantic probably in the book, but whatever. That's what, like, these kind of conversations, and after the book is in the world now, it's something leading up to the publication of the book. I really had to keep telling myself was that the book is its own thing. It exists as an artifact of a time and a long time and multiple places, but it's also the beginning. It's the beginning of how I'm more publicly trying to explore these themes. Hopefully, it won't be my last book, but I hope that it's like a
Mhm.
springboard for developing more on some of those, like you say, the indigeneity together with the whiteness and how those contradict, how those contrast, but also how they complement each other.
Yeah, yeah, and that reminds me too of a memoir
Mm.
style book that I read of one woman. She had mentioned how a part of it is, like, reflecting on that. It's because she half her family is the indigenous slash so half of she's half of what came about when the word is
Yeah.
mestizo, I think, where they came and conquered the indigenous people, so it was like a mix
Mm.
of the conquerors and the conquered. And so I thought it was so interesting. That's just what that your point reminds me of, grappling with that, because there's like the power struggle there, and it's obviously your lineage, like you're descended from that
Mhm.
conflict and from both of those sides. And so I thought, yeah, I just thought that was an interesting thing to how does that play into where I am in the
Mhm.
world today, or how I perceive my role in the world. I just think it's so fascinating to learn not just over the histories and stuff like that, but I did one of those 23andMe
Yeah,
things,
yeah.
and I knew I knew my dad's mostly
Mm.
Irish. I knew that my mom's family was from Mexico, and so like a lot of my relatives, like still live down there. They own properties on like both sides of
Mm.
the border, like a little closer to Tijuana. But so it's cool there to see, because that's like it's the borders there versus I don't know Paraguay. It's like that's
It's
Central
south.
America,
It's even
right?
further. Yeah.
Yeah, way yeah, of South America. Yeah. So I think it's interesting to just once I did those like DNA tests, and I could see, because it really just goes back like these traces that you have in your DNA, the original could be from before, like when these tribes were
Mhm.
migrating, like before when Pangea was still Pangea. That's how far
Yeah.
back it goes. And it's so interesting, like how that I'm just gonna ramble on a little bit, but it's really expressive of how we are all just we're continuing on that
Mm.
lineage, and how crazy those journeys have gotten, and like we got
Mhm.
here, and where someone like you is just okay. So you said you're from Central Illinois. Is that where you're originally from? And
Yeah.
yeah, where you said, because the thing about the brown skin, I tease my dad and me like tease my mom because she goes out once and then stays brown all year. Like we we just tease her about that, but it was interesting to see again, when I was doing my DNA testing and then checking it out, it was just like, "Oh, it says Native
Mhm.
American, but it's like Mexico." So I'm like, "Okay." that had to rewire my brain a little bit because I'm like, oh, well, I'm Mexican. It's no, that makes sense. It's because it's
Hmm.
America, North America, South America, Central America. I get it. They're probably just all those indigenous groups. It's their
Hmm.
Native Americans. Okay, now I understand. And now I'm like, oh, yep, and because it says Mexico, not United
Yeah.
States. So that kind of helped me rewire, not rewire it completely, but could just get like a new
Hmm.
understanding of how far back that goes and what's classified that and all this whatever DNA is in that in their repertoire that they're and how they're categorizing
Yeah.
it. It's stuff like that to think about. So yeah, some of your I think also some of your it just I think just from my family background, just some of your works like just resonated with me. It just
Mm.
clicked and it's like the other layer of that is yeah, like how is that reflecting? How are you using this as a therapeutic exercise? Or maybe it's opposite of therapeutic because I don't know how stressful it was for you to like bring this out
Mm.
into the
Yeah.
world. This could be like both sides of it. But yeah, I totally appreciate the struggle that maybe you went through, and I just think it's interesting, like to pick your brain apart to see like how you dealt with that. 'Cause yeah, I
Yeah.
totally get it.
You
It's
know.
just, yeah, it's just it's funny. I guess it's funny now, but maybe like when you were like growing
Mm.
up and you were dealing with name calling maybe from both
Yeah.
sides because I think something that you had reflected maybe in like your author's note or something was that you were teased on both
Yeah.
sides of it. Growing up here, white skin versus brown skin, and then when you went to go visit your
Hmm.
dad's side and
Yeah.
they're teasing you more and you reflected that in your
Yeah.
poetry. I thought that was really interesting too because you were just trying to go you're used to that, right? You were used to
Oh
those
yeah. Yeah.
trips
We'd
occasionally.
go
Yeah.
every 3 years or so for like a month at a time. It's like it's definitely a core memory. It's like such a just like staple of my memory and of my growing up, my childhood. And it continued even into young adulthood. The last time I was there was in 2020, right before everything locked down, like late February or first week of March in 2020.
Mm,
Really, I also I did the 23andMe a few years ago as well. And it's interesting, right? Because like many people, I think, know what to expect. Like I thought I had an idea.
sure.
And I was surprised how much of the native, I don't want to say blood, that sounds so weird, but like the DNA was in there, like the genetic markers were in there as the so that together with for me the big eye opener was that I had more Portuguese than Spanish, and that was it was shocking to me at the time because the story I had been told and the story I had told myself was right. My dad's from Paraguay; they speak Spanish. It's a Latin American country. Therefore, there's that history. But learning, and then of course, learning more about the colonial history of Paraguay, which I didn't, I actually, I guess that's not that surprising. I didn't know much of beforehand. It's not a topic that's taught in Central Illinois. They didn't cover it in grad school. And so
Sure.
it was really later in the game of drafting the book that I really dived into that and learned a lot in almost too late. Again, this is probably for the next book or whatever, but learning about the colonial history and how it was more the Portuguese coming in and enslaving and subjugating the Guarani peoples and other indigenous peoples there was really eye opening. And it was narrative shifting, right? That kind of changes my understanding of my identity. At the same time, though, it sounds like you're in a similar situation. We have to be careful about some of that, right? Because like it wouldn't really matter if my DNA test showed 20, 50, 70% Native American genetic markers. That doesn't change the fact that I grew up in Central Illinois. I passed for white. I am white in some contexts, and I still don't know the indigenous language. I know a little bit of it. I grew up hearing it, but I'm not fluent by any means. And so, on the one hand, that distance I have to respect and acknowledge, and I try to do that in the poems and how I talk and think about my relationship to that country that I'm not from, but I consider it a home, but I'm not from there. I don't live there. But at the same time, I don't want to overstep that. I think there's been several in the past in the U.S. several high profile cases of people being like, I have a Cherokee grandfather, therefore I can speak on this issue or what. It's no,
Mm,
you don't. Your lived experience is so much different.
yeah.
Honor that heritage for sure, but be real. And so that's been a tricky
Yeah.
thing, and I hope that comes through in the book. It was really tricky to navigate, and like I say, or I guess like you say, it is still something that's evolving as I learn more and as this question has been complicated by I have a child now. I didn't have a child when the first versions of the manuscript were coming together.
Mm,
And that
mm.
my child's journey with her identity and her parentage is going to be totally different than mine was. Like she doesn't have the same. And so that I've seen or I've found it to be mostly a site of like really interesting and productive kind of question asking and question posing, while also just it is complicating this notion of like how do I show up as a Latino? How do I show up as a white person? And trying to be as conscious as I can about that. I think that's important.
Yeah, I think I have a feeling you're definitely gonna come out with a new
Mm.
collection after fatherhood, because I think that's totally it just when people who ask, like, I have 2 little boys, and it's just I don't know, you're, like, leveling
Yeah.
up as a human. That's it you're learning a different role, like, you're taking on a different role, and you're learning new skills whether you want to or not.
Yeah.
You can't you can train as much as you want, you could prepare as much as you want, but honestly, I just tell people just take one day at a time because it really is you never know, and the experience of labor and delivery should tell you that you can have a plan if you want, but
Mhm.
it won't always matter. Like, actually 90% of the time, it probably won't matter at all. And so I think definitely like becoming a parent is part of that
Mhm.
shift, right? It's part of another shift in you being a human person, like a human
Yeah.
being. And because I remember, I don't know if you're familiar with Ananda
Oh, yeah.
Lima. Yeah, I interviewed her a couple of years ago when she was releasing her collection
Mhm.
Motherland, and I thought it was so fascinating. She was a lovely person to talk to, but I thought it was fascinating. Her whole thing was she was raising like an American
Mhm.
son, and in America, like when she was American now, but she's not from here. I forget where she was
Mhm.
from, but I think like another Southern or Central American. I think she speaks
Brazil,
Portuguese,
yeah,
so it's
yeah.
not one of those. Yeah, I feel like I can't remember where she was from. So yeah, I just thought it was such a like a profound way to
Mm.
look at it. Like, how does raising a child in a country different than your own um
Mhm.
affect your not just your parenting style, but who you are as an
Mhm.
artist and how you express yourself and what's important to you now. So I would bet I'll probably see your name pop up somewhere along the line after a few more years. How old is your
Yep, so
child
she's
now?
5, she turned 5 in April. It's funny, some of the
Okay.
poems in the book
Oh,
are
okay.
about I wrote them when she was a newborn, and then it's just a testament to how long it
Sure.
takes or how long it took me to get a book into publication that now it's funny to read those poems. I still read them often,
Yeah.
I'll read them, like, at readings or whatever at events, and they're very meaningful to me because, like you say, becoming a parent, it's not just about, yeah, you have a plan or you have a vision or you have ideas for who you wanna be as a guardian to this life, and as soon as I'm sure you've had very similar situations, but as soon as you get it down or get a rhythm or figure out a certain stage or age, then things change. Like there's a new thing, a new
Mhm.
development, they become a new person, and you're always just like growing together. And it gave
Yeah.
me a new appreciation for, I mean, I write about my dad a lot in the book. My mom's in there a little bit too, but it gave me a new appreciation both for not just, oh, thanks, like being a parent is hard. Thanks for doing that for me. But the stories that I remember from childhood, and we would tease my dad. I have 2 younger brothers. We're all very close in age, and a lot of the stories from the poems in the book, they're like there. Even if I don't name them, when I wrote it in my mind, they're there too, participating. And we would tease my dad about his anxiety at airports, which is also a little ironic because for a
Oh.
person he spent so much of his life on airplanes. He used to be, and I think he's better now, but he used to be just this mess. We would poke fun and laugh about it, and I wrote a couple poems from that perspective. But now as a parent, I get it. Like I have been the person like flipping out in line with this thing that won't close and we're late and all this. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh my God, now I'm on go inside. It's come full circle.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, I think I've only flown with my kids once. The older one, he was like 8 months old, but yeah, I remember I was going out of town for work and we were able to work it out where my husband and kids were able to tag along, but because my son was still in school and so my husband couldn't get all the
Mm,
days off, so they met up with us a day later. So it was just me and the 3-year-old. And he's the one that's just I joke, he's like the spawn of Satan. He's the wild card. He wakes up every day and chooses violence. I just don't I can ask people, is it like a second born thing? Because I don't remember the older one being so
mm,
destructive and violent and confrontational. And just the thing is, he's the cutest thing in the world. And this is obviously everyone thinks their child is beautiful, but that's one of the first things I hear people say, "Oh my God, he's so cute." I'm like, yeah, he knows. He knows how cute he is. He knows that he's adorable. And that's why I can't look at him and just you'd be like, "Fuck you right
yeah,
now." Like, I can't be mad at him. I can't call him an
yeah,
asshole because I'm like, "Oh my God, you're adorable and I will do everything for you, but please stop whipping your brother with your swim goggles. Like, why are you doing that?"
funny.
Like, for no reason whatsoever other than he's bored or he thinks it's funny or because it is getting him attention. So I'm not sure what it is. And so it's just like one of those things where where it's like you get older and it's like they get older and you're like, once you're playing
Yeah,
almost playing catch
totally.
up, then you're playing catch up because so now they know how to pull themselves up. Okay, now time to move all the items that you don't want up a
Yeah.
level. And it's like, crap, now they can reach the counter. Now we can't use that space for things that we don't want them to reach. Or now they're crawling, now they're walking. Okay, now they are like, love the water. Okay, that's great. How are we going to make it so that they can entertain themselves and keep themselves safe? It's a whole
Mhm.
thing, and it does come with the challenges, even if when you're not a writer or an artist or a
Mhm.
poet, whatever. If you're not any of those things, if you're just like a regular person like me who's just doing a normal 9 to
Mhm.
5 job, I would even say for you, if you were just a professor and you weren't
Mhm.
like publishing a book, it's just, no matter where you're at, it's something shifts, or it's okay, now you're like in mommy or daddy mode versus, okay, like my kids are not here. Okay, time to switch, like time to be a person, like a normal non-person. It's that part. I feel like it can become overwhelming for sure. So that's why I enjoy talking to authors who are
Mhm.
also
Mhm.
parents, how that reflects in their work and how that reflects in their approach. And it's just with this, especially since a lot of it is just the subject matter is how you were navigating the
Mhm.
world and just being born how you are and something that you had no control over,
Yeah.
right? And how going forward, not just with your work, but with your family now
Mhm.
too. It's like, how is that?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. It's all thanks mom and dad for being a parent. Now I have a little more sympathy for them, but at the same time, I'm like, I know that I didn't like this, so
Mhm.
we'll see if I could have a different approach and stuff like that. If you have the sympathy, but then you're also
Mhm.
grateful, and even I don't know if I guess I have a very fortunate position where my parents were I don't have any resentment towards them. Like, I'm very
Yeah.
lucky. Every family has issues, but I feel like in retrospect, I had a very
Mhm.
fortunate upbringing. So it's reflecting on that parentage and those childhood experiences, and then just being like, okay, how's that now? That it's just what all people who become parents like go
Mhm.
through, I
Mhm.
think, where they're like, what do I want to be? How do I want to be? But then some days I'm just like, here's a bag of chips,
Yeah.
leave me alone.
Please, for the love of God, can you just occupy yourself?
Seriously, can you stop hitting each other? That'd be great. If
Yeah.
you don't have a second kid, but maybe you won't ever have to worry about that, or I don't know. Maybe it's because you grew up with
Mhm.
brothers, or you're like, I don't know, I'm good. I
Well,
don't
you know what? That's funny because you mentioned the lack or the relative lack of resentment. I think as well that I was very fortunate in that I remember when I think about my childhood, I feel grateful that it was what it was. This book coming into the world has prompted me to. I'm trying to be more, I don't want to say real, urgently real. Like I'm finally asking them. Like they both still live in Central Illinois. I live here in Chicago, so I don't see them super frequently, but when we talk on the phone just about once a week, and I'm really trying to take advantage of those phone calls and ask the questions that I probably,
Mm,
I don't want to say should have asked, but like I have wanted to ask, but I didn't have the words for, I didn't have the heart for, and now I'm just realizing, not to be hyperbolic, but like that time is limited. Like there is an endpoint, and I don't
yeah.
like it in terms of also this a lot. Like you were saying, times one of the best pieces of advice I got was from my youngest brother, actually, who he has two kids, and he had both of his kids before I had mine. And when I was becoming a new father, I was asking advice from my younger brothers, which is a funny position to be in, one that I welcome. And he said to just be present and cherish even the hard times, because at some point you won't do that ever again. And when he said that, I was having
Mm,
a very hard time imagining that because I was changing diapers, I
yeah.
was up at 4 in the morning, all that nonsense. But man, he was so right. Because at some point, she just stopped wearing diapers. And I was trying to prepare myself proactively for when she wouldn't go down for a nap again. And I was usually the one who would put her down for nap time. Like I'd rock her to sleep, she'd fall asleep, I'd put her in a crib or whatever. And as the crib lowered into a bed and the bed became like like a bigger kid bed, it just stopped. And I had been trying to plan for it and know, oh, this might be the last one. But all of a sudden, just no more nap times. I'm just like, Jesus, it hasn't
Mm,
been that long. She's only 5, but also she's already walking around. She's got friends and opinions.
yeah.
And I'm just like, geez. Oh,
She's got a little personality. She has preferences.
yeah.
What?
And that same thing goes for the parents too. Like they are also
Mhm.
their own people. And I'm really, especially with my dad, he's got a lot of stories I'm sure that haven't been told, but my mom especially is the kind of person who she won't bring up like her own like stories or her own wild family past unless you ask about it, or it might just come out like an offhand comment. Like relatively recently, she just busted out the news that like my aunt, her older sister, had a previous life before meeting her current husband and the guy I know as my uncle. I was like, wait, what? When did this happen? And she's like, oh yeah, you didn't know? I was like, no, you didn't tell me any of this. How would I have known that? But those secrets now I'm trying to more proactively get at those, both for, I'm sure it'll show up in the writing, but mostly just as a person. I want to round out that part of who my parents were and are as people, separate from, but also irrevocably influenced by their role as parents.
Yeah, 100%. It just reminds me, that sentiment reminds me of seeing pictures of when my mom was a baby or a toddler or a kid. I'm like, oh my God, baby mom. And it's reminders like that. You're
Yeah,
like, oh yeah, like you had a whole life that has nothing to do
yeah,
with
yeah.
us. Because my mom, I think she was married and divorced before she met my dad. So there's like a good age gap there. So she had me when she was 35, which is like older for, especially for giving birth in the 80s.
Hmm.
I think that's like late. I think a lot of the times it was like, what, that's not your sixth child? What are you doing? Like Irish, Mexican,
Yeah.
Catholic. That's just what you're supposed to do, right? Just keep pumping out babies. But yeah, so I just remember, it just reminds me, I think of another, like, just stories that our parents may not have thought about to tell us. I just remember talking to my mom about the movie Mommy Dearest, and or where I didn't realize it was based on a memoir. And then it was really funny because I just, a core memory is when I'm like a really young, like under 10 maybe, where I was like, okay, Mommy Dearest. And she was like, do not ever call me that. And I just remember she was serious, and then I'm like, I discovered why, and then I eventually watched the movie, and then I was like, how scandalous it was, and was it really true, the memoir, whatever. And then I asked my mom, I was like, how was it when it came out or whatever? And she was like, I don't know. I was thinking like, what's the big deal? Everybody was like all about the abuse, but it's like my mom chased me around with a whip she bought from Mexico. Like what? Like in the kitchen. And when it would break or wear off, she'd go back to Mexico and buy another one. So that's just what it reminds me of, those stories where
Mhm.
it's, again, it's like digging a little bit deeper.
Mhm.
That's a whole cultural thing, right? Like we're in America, it's just, oh my God, the wire hanger. And here my mom is like, what? I got chased around my kitchen
Yeah.
with a whip, and grandma, like my mom would keep a fresh one around. Always, right? Like, I don't, I know. And it's funny that, yeah, it's okay. Like, like, no, because yeah, my parents never did that to me. They never chased us around with a whip. So it's like maybe some of that stuff like reflects in her parenting style, but it also reminded me when you were saying about story about your family. I was like, no, yeah, that's what that reminds me of
Mhm.
too. It's just you remember how your, like, oh, your parents are
Mhm.
people before you ever gave them that parent
Yeah.
role or they had to deal with you. You're the eldest too, you said, so I imagine them parenting you was probably a lot different
Mhm.
than your 2
Yeah.
brothers, or I guess it depends on the age gap, but you guys said you were all
Yeah.
close in age, so I don't know. Like, what did you feel that way where it was wrangling a herd, like it was all of you guys, or were you singled out sometimes because you were the
That's a good
oldest?
thinking about this in a lot of my life, not even thinking, but just in my body corporally reacting against the role of eldest. And my
Mm,
dad is the oldest as well. And his life, though, as the oldest child of, it was 10, now 8, was very different to my experience. And for most of my life, though, I grew up knowing that. And I don't exactly know how that came about or how that happened, but I knew that my dad's life as the oldest, he was delivering packages or newspapers or something as a 12-year-old or a 10-year-old on his bicycle in Villarica in Paraguay. And I wasn't having to do that, obviously, as a 10-year-old. But I did get a job relatively young. My brothers and I entered our teen years and became a little more rebellious. My dad would often look to me, not just look to me, but flat out just direct me or call me, ask me to be the in between, the go between him and my younger brothers. And I resented that a lot for a long time
mm,
because my knee jerk reaction was just like, I'm their brother. I have a different relationship. Now I understand, of course, that maybe not, of course, I understand now that was a particularly trying time for my father as a dad, as a husband. My parents have since split up. And that he wasn't asking me to be the father. He was asking me to connect with them as a brother. And contrasted against his relationship, my dad's relationship with his father, who I only ever knew as abuelo. Never really had super deep conversations with him because our Spanish, especially when we were younger, was limited. My abuelo, developed dementia relatively early on, and it just became harder and harder to interact with him. In the book a little bit, not as much as I wasn't ready to write more deeply about him or my abuela, but they'll show up again later. But now, I guess this is true too. I'm trying to kind of ask these bigger questions of my parents to get to know them in different ways. So too with my brothers. I do feel like I failed them in some ways as an older brother. But like now that we're all adults and they both, it's so funny, our lives unfolded in reverse. So I did the go to college, go to grad school, get a job. They both jumped into having jobs and families first and then went back and got their degrees. But now that we've completed very similar life journeys, just in different order and different parts of the country, we just recently spent some time together in Michigan. We've been doing these like brother like trips, hangout trips, just for a night or two to kind of reconnect and get away. And we can connect in this new way. Like all three of us have come through these journeys separately, but also now we're landed in the same place. And neither one of them writes poetry, but they were the first people I read to from the book because they're in it. Especially my Miguel is named in the book. He's the youngest brother, but some of the experiences I combined, like Armando and Miguel, my brothers, together to tell a story or whatever. And we were camping in Central Illinois to the extent that you can do that. And I read from the book to them. That was the first time I'd read from the book to anybody. And just sharing, because I was like, you guys probably want to hear these. Like, you're in this book. These are about you. It was really special to like connect in that way and to continue to ask questions and actually to be able to learn from them now. Like they know so much stuff that I don't or didn't or haven't learned yet, just like around parenting, about being a father, but also they're both like way more handy than I am. And so just questions of, we have a condo, they have houses in Bloomington, but just hearing from them some of the things that they've been able to do, and they laugh at me like the problems I come to them with. They're just like, you need to just obviously do this or disconnect that or whatever. But it's really special to have that bond and have that relationship that continues to grow. I think is so crucial.
That's funny. You just be like, Dad, I don't want to be a narc. I'm not
Yeah,
trying to do
exactly.
this. Oh, no, I think it's something that's really good. I think that you're able to maintain and maybe even get closer to your brothers as you get older. And now, like you said, even though you got there in different ways and on your different timelines, you guys all have like similar experiences now where you can still maintain like intimate, close relationships beyond just yeah, that's my brother. No, like we go on our guys trips, like we do this. Like I'm fascinated that you read your poetry to them instead of like just having them read it on their own when you're not in the room. I feel like I would just be like, okay, Rick, that's fine if you want to read it, just don't talk to me about it. I don't even though it's like the opposite of what some people I think, yeah, I think it's great that how you approach that situation the way that you did. But I don't know if that's ever something that I would just be like, here, sit down. I want to read my words to you. You weren't nervous at all, or it was just like, of course I'm going to read this to them.
That's a good question. I had tried to them for it a little bit. Like I had mentioned in an offhand way, oh, some of the poems, like you're in it, whatever. But something about being around the fire, and it was like early September, we had gotten away. Well, it was actually quite warm. I remember this now. It was a scorcher. But there was like a thunderstorm rolling in that missed us, but we could see it over the lake. And I will say that I hope that it's fair to them as much as I also for both my parents, I took the approach that you were mentioning. So for my parents, I gave them the galley and I was like, you should please read this. And I knew my mom would read every single word on every single page, no question.
Oh,
And she did. And my dad, I'm pretty sure he did as well because I talked a couple times as he was reading it. And this was well before the book came out. This is like last fall. And both of them came to me separately because they're divorced, but they came to me separately when I followed up with them. And the first thing both of them said was like, congratulations, we're proud of you, whatever, which is nice. But then the second thing that both of them said were corrections to things that were in there. And I was like, grateful, thank you, but like artistic license, poetic license. But it was very funny
yeah.
how both of them had the same impulse to be like, Diego.
You're like, no, but if you're telling me I'm wrong, then that's totally gonna mess up this message that I'm like reflecting on. Just let me remember it how I remembered it, please. I'm just
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Exactly.
oh, that's great. I love that. So just a few more questions before we wrap up here. So let me see. I'm gonna throw this one at you. What were the most challenging parts about bringing this project together and the most enjoyable parts? You can either go to specific parts that you wrote or just the
Yeah.
experience in general.
The most challenging part has been, if I'm going to be honest, it's been managing the moving goalposts for success for myself. The goal at first was like write some poems. Then it was like publish some poems. Then it was get a book together. Then it was publish a book. Then it was get it reviewed. And I think it's just more a comment on my character or maybe our culture that I have to check myself and remind myself. I find it very helpful, like really helpful, when other authors post things, their successes, but also about how like we are not each other's competitors. We are each other's proponents and fans and critics. But there's a difference between being a critic and a competitor. That has been way harder than I like to admit. That's useful, I think, to put into words. The most rewarding part has been just having the luxury and the invitation to revisit the poems as frequently as I have been. And so I've been very fortunate to line up gigs and events and readings and performances where I'll come back to certain poems or I'll read a poem. There's still poems in the book that I've never read out loud. And so whenever I get a chance to do that for the first time, it's a learning experience for me too. What's landing, what's not? Should I change it for the live performance of it? And that's just not, I don't think that's an opportunity I would have had were it not for having a collection together, like putting out a book together. I'm sure I'll get sick of it, and there are certain poems where I'm done reading them, like, ugh, I don't want to read this one again. But that's a gift. That is a privilege. It's such a privileged position to be in. So yeah, those are definitely the challenges and the rewards for sure.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see the moving the goalpost because it's, yeah, like now what? Like you've accomplished it. Now what?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
just go for more.
yeah.
Move that goal. What do you hope readers get out of this book?
I've had to answer this question a few times, and I love it because my answer keeps changing too. I think for anybody who were to pick up the book, I hope they would learn some things about Paraguay, and though I hope that they don't put the book down believing that what they have just read is like a documentary account of Paraguay, because it's not. There's a lot of fact in there. There's a lot of fiction. There's a lot of stuff I made up. There's a lot of stuff that I get wrong intentionally and oftentimes unintentionally, right? So this is just like one white Latino man's viewpoint through this experience that I hope can be trusted through the speakers of the book, but also that it's incomplete. And I hope that it will lead people down further explorations, not just of Paraguayan or Paraguayan American literature, but to pick up those books or to explore those authors from countries and cultures that maybe they otherwise wouldn't have. There's so much incredible literature being published and being translated from Central and South America, from the Caribbean, from all over, that if you're not reading that stuff, you're doing yourself a disservice. You got to broaden those horizons for sure.
Yeah, I think that's why I always, even if I can't relate at all, I just always try to find that positive, like that optimism. Well, this is an opportunity for me to read something that I have no idea about, or just that form of it, like poetry or creative nonfiction, even, or just an actual fictional piece of historical fiction, things like
Yeah.
that. It's opportunities to read one version of millions of stories that are out there for people to tell and the different ways that you can tell them. Yeah, I know I could definitely appreciate that for sure. What is next for you? You mentioned some things. Are you working on anything that you could talk about?
Yeah, I am now, I think, comfortable saying that this will be a thing. So I had felt a lot of pressure, just internal pressure from myself to once the book came out to do the next thing relatively quickly, because this took 10 or 12 years. I'd like it to go a little more quickly. So as maybe you could tell from all my gear here, I got turned on to Formula One motor racing during the pandemic through the Netflix show Drive
Okay.
to Survive, and then just following along and going like full on fanatic for a while. I think I might still be in that phase. But I started writing some poems, not really about F1, but inspired by the sport, by the show, by the characters and the personalities. And it just feels like it's a really rich, contained, super niche. That's true, but there's a lot of homosocial dynamics, homoeroticism, even I would say, and it's so interesting, and it's proven interesting enough that I think I'm getting a chapbook together. I don't know if it'll be a full length, but I've certainly got a chapbook worth of poems together related to or inspired by Formula One racing. And then I've already started maybe thinking about the next book of Paraguay poems, but that is a much further goal. Right now, I'm like really excited
Mm.
to get these weird poems in a place where I'm ready for other people to read them and maybe bring them into the world.
Yeah, it's always like when something that's super niche or like maybe a little out there. But I think, yeah, maybe you just have to learn how to find your community,
Yep.
find your people who appreciate that type of weird, or maybe they don't know they like it, and
Yeah.
they'll read some of your stuff and be like, "Wait, what? This is a thing?" Yeah, that'll be really interesting to see how that goes. Okay, so Diego Baez, where can we find you online and on social media?
Yep. You can find me at diegobaez.com, but then also on Instagram, I am at Profe Baez, Profe Baez. And I think I'm on Facebook and Twitter a little bit, but I prefer Instagram. I like it slick. It's easy to navigate for a millennial like me. Yeah, those are the two best
Yeah.
ways.
I like I said, I try to reach it's more like the book community, and I find that the Instagram
Yes.
bookstagram is a thing. And so it's interesting to see what people prefer and how people are getting their information that they're looking for. And that's the same like I'm on Facebook and Twitter because I feel like you should, but yeah, I'm right there with you. I enjoy the other parts much more. But I don't know if it has anything to do with being a millennial myself, so I don't know. It's interesting, but it's we're just getting too old for one, I think. And it's still there. So it's like
Yeah.
interesting to see what is the algorithm going to do to me today? I don't know.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, I'm going to try this. Yaguareté White. Yaguareté. See, I know how that is pronounced, that GU. Because for my whole life, my mom's relatives would tease me and my dad, call him like "Güero, güera," and I did not know until 3 years ago that it's spelled with a GUERA. Like, it's just an example of learning how
Mm,
speak
mhm.
auditory versus reading, writing. Because then I'm like, "What word
Yeah.
is that?" I've seen it printed. I
Yeah.
was like,
Yeah.
what word is that? I think it was like my family member commenting on a photo, and she used that word, and I was like, "What?" I was like, "Weta." I was like, "I know
Wait a
words." So
minute.
that's why I'm like, yeah. It's part of that whole experience. But yeah, so Yaguareté White, that's out now, collection of poems. I recommend it for poetry lovers, for people
Mm,
who are in the same camp of maybe half their family's first generation, or first generation on one side versus not first generation on another side. There's so many of us in America that are the result of all these cultures and people, families falling in love and continuing their lives together, and seeing where that plays out and how it affects us as we're trying to figure it out. So yeah, I
mhm.
appreciate that, and I recommend this collection to people who fall in that same camp. And this was super fun. So if and when you're gonna release anything weird or not weird, feel free to come back and we'll chat again.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. This has been a pleasure.
And there you go. That was Diego Baez talking about his collection of poems called Yaguareté White. That title starts with a Y. People just look up Diego Baez, and that's a collection that you will find. But as you please peruse, rate, review, subscribe, check out the show notes where you can buy his work on his website, and check out where you can find Diego online and on social media. While you're perusing social media, please go ahead and find Cantina Book Club. Hit that follow, subscribe, like button. It really does help me to reach not only you, but to reach your fellow bookworms and people in your book community. And it really helps me a lot. So, and as always, thank you guys so much for listening.